Hi, welcome back to another one of our series in painting. This one's been aimed purely at coach painting. It's a word that gets bandied around a lot, or a term that gets used a lot, and it's something that takes a lot of forms nowadays. Traditional coach painting back in the day, paints were a lot different, the application process was different. And you still hear people saying they're coach painting in a traditional manner. Very difficult to do because the paints are now made for the professional and the DIYer alike. So certain things have changed. Drying times, for instance. Paint dries a lot faster now than what the old coach painters would have used. So our techniques need to change. But as close as I can, I'm going to demonstrate some of the old techniques, some of the older ways, and as I move down this board, hopefully we'll start bringing in some of the new and more modern ways to achieve the same standard. So I'm going to get on with some paint, and what we're going to do is we're just going to use a double brush or two brush technique for coach painting. In the old days, it was quite common to have somebody putting the paint on the surface, someone else taking it off, and that term now is generally applied to as laying off, and often accomplished all with the same brush. So we would add paint to the surface, lay it off so that we get some nice texture under there, and allow it to flow out as we move on. Now in the older days, and again, things change from yard to yard depending who's doing the painting, but quite common to have a stiffer brush, a better brush for moving this thicker, heavier paint around on the surface, and then either do it yourself by swapping brushes, or someone else would lay the paint off. The term we use, lay off, in those days it would have been taking off. So if you think about it, they were applying more paint than was necessary and then removing the surplus. So quite a trick, if you like, to actually be able to accomplish. Nowadays we tend to put on and lay off all with the same brush, and probably not actually take off. It's more a case of straightening it up, allowing the paint to flow out, and sort of leaving it at the thickness or the texture that you've achieved. I'm a bit of a fan of using rollers, but the roller only takes the place of the brush that you would have used to apply. We still use a brush then to lay off over the top of that. So we haven't really changed a huge amount. I can remember talking to my songwriter whose father and grandfather were coach painters, and when he spoke to his father about it, he said if we'd have had rollers in the old days we would have used them. So we've just got that advantage now of using a roller. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some paint on this surface. I'm going to put it on in the traditional manner, and I'm going to apply with one brush, take off if you like, or lay off with the other brush. The brushes are actually slightly different. I always use Purdy brushes. If I'm doing using a heavy paint, then I'll use the Purdy Pro Extras. Extra stiff. These paint brushes will move the paint around the surface. If you go for, say, a Monarch Elite or a much softer brush, what you'll find is where you put the paint on the surface, you have now problems in moving it, and you get thicker areas, so the spread is a lot harder. If you get that, of course, as you move down and you've got a thick area of paint, that's when it will start to hang or run on the surface. So if you're going to do it this way, go for two different brushes. And remember, the second one is to remove paint, not just to straighten it up. So have a paint kettle or an old tin to wipe surplus paint from your brush. That way, hopefully you'll achieve a good standard. Now, having done a bit of painting, the Pelican Wooster here I've found to be a really useful bit of kit. It holds the paint. You can hang a roller in here, you'll see me do that later. It sticks to your hand. You can even tip it around a bit without that worry of spilling paint. Also, obviously, we've taken the paint from the tin, we've decanted it. When I tip it back in the tin, I can put that through a sieve, keeps the paint in good condition at all times. It is worth mentioning just before we start painting that I don't adjust my paints at all. I've had quite a few conversations with various paint manufacturers and chemists. Generally speaking, they don't want you to alter the paint either. A lot of the reasons people use for altering paints is to extend the drying time, allowing paints to flow out and so on. Well, most manufacturers make the paint, I'm using Top Black from International, a paint I guess that some people don't necessarily like because it's a heavy paint. Nothing wrong with this paint, absolutely top quality paint. I've actually been to the factory and seen it made, and I can assure you, you're not going to come across a better drop of paint. But you do need to be able to move it, and you do need to think about techniques. Now, as I said, people adjust paints for drying times, wet edge, all this sort of thing. I would tend not to go down that route if I had the options. Very rarely do we ever add anything to paint. It really comes down to the application process. If you're applying it right, then that's good. I have had criticism about our paint work on our boats. Hold our hands up. Can you tell it was done with a brush? Yes. Is it absolutely brush mark free? No, and I'll be the first to admit it. However, if you're going to thin paints and adjust them, you must put on multiple coats. And in today's environment, where we're looking at a commercial aspect as far as I'm concerned, I have to make sure that the film thickness is achieved. Now, if you're going to adjust paints, thin them, put various liquids in to extend their drying times, then you're changing the composition of the paint, and you may have to now put, instead of 3 coats of paint to achieve 100 plus microns as a dry film thickness, you may have to put 4 or even 5 coats on. Now that's fine if you've got the time to do that and you're happy to flat down between each coat and increase that level. From a commercial aspect, we want to put 3 coats on. To us, the most important thing is that film thickness. There's a fairly easy process to look at. The thicker the film thickness, the longer the paint surface will last. If you don't put much paint on, your surface won't last. Now, by thinning out, yes, you can get brushstroke free finishes, because there's an old adage, you can't get brush marks in water. So if you put it on so thinly that there are no brush marks, all you've got to remember is that A will potentially lead to a thin film thickness. Additionally, too much additives can result in loss of gloss and a rapid deterioration of the paint. So enough sort of technical stuff, let's get on with a bit of painting, because that's what this is about. You've probably seen, or if you've watched any of my videos before, you've seen me apply paint with a roller. We still work very much the same method with the brush. I've put the brush in, so we've got about 1/2 inch of paint, and you see people wiping the brush. Yeah, I just put the brush in, leave that paint to run off. That's just getting rid of any surplus. Catch the extra paint in the brush. There's no point in not having it. And you can see, look, we just work that in a square. Okay, and the paintbrush is not leaving the surface. This is quite important, otherwise you flick paint all over the place. Move the paint now to the edges by moving to the edge, spreading the paint out. This is quite important that we actually spread paint. And once that's completed, I can move on again, let the surplus out and paint another square. People worry that painting is difficult. Painting's actually quite easy. All you need to be able to do is paint 9-inch squares. Once I've painted a square, this is the time now where I can blend these 2 squares together. That's quite important again. Don't apply the paint directly to the previous square, otherwise you'll have problems. Again, I've only got a little bit there, so just fill that bit in. And again, look, I haven't gone to the tape, haven't gone to the edges. This is important because you need to blend the paint or move the paint to the edges. Don't do it so that you're applying paint on paint, because you can't move it, you've got a thick area. Now the paint's on there, we're ready to lay off. So I'm going to swap brushes. I've got a softer brush now, which will allow me to lay that paint off nice and smoothly, getting the minimum amount of brush strokes. Now if you allow paint to relax, the ridges caused by the brush will diminish. However, we're painting on a vertical surface, and if you're painting on a vertical surface, the only way that paint can relax or move is downhill, because gravity takes it that way. So the brush marks won't go in opposite directions. There's no reason why they should. At a molecular level there is a certain amount of tightening, but how much that will actually make a difference to your finish is negligible. You won't really notice that tightening of the surface, although it does happen. Again, I've painted a square. Blend the squares together only after you've painted the square, and that gives you that assurance then that we're not going to start getting nasty sags because we've got the paint too thick. So on again, move the paint around, up and down, and then blend. That's working those dry bits in. There's loads of paint on there, so we're good with that. Little drop just to finish this corner, or this bottom edge, and again, once we're happy we've got it on, we can blend those bits together. It's not difficult to do. I'm not racing along at a huge pace to get this on because I'm worried about it drying. Now, as I'm pulling that brush through, few little tips. Don't pull the brush through at a huge rate of knots. You don't want to skim over the surface. You want to put sufficient pressure on that brush so that you pull out any of the residual brush marks that are left from when you first apply the paint. That will just sort that out. And it also, by going through it steady, it gives the paint time to actually move. Now again, little mistakes or little things you can keep an eye on while you're painting. Occasionally as you're painting, I'm painting quite a dark blue paint here over quite a light background. Now it's quite normal that as you do it, you may, as you pull through the paint, just expose a little bit of the background through. Don't worry about that. This is our first coat of paint. It's almost one that's going to seal the undercoat. It's just the first build up. Don't attempt to put a huge thick layer of paint on the surface just because you want it to cover all in one go. If it's not covering all in one go, as long as you're not applying it too thinly, it will cover on the second coat, and that's how you have to think about it. It's a multiple coat system. You don't want to be in a position where you've tried to get it all done in 2 coats, and then you've got sags and runs in the paint because it's just too thick. It actually, as a coating, 3 coats, apart from the end result being the same thickness as 2 thick coats as opposed to 3 thinner coats, it actually helps the paint. It helps its lifespan. It helps to make sure that the paint makes a better protective layer. The reasoning behind that is that any bubbles that might be generated in the painting or sitting on the surface and burst after we've run the brush through them can leave wormholes. They can leave a little air gap that runs down to the coat below. Now if you're unlucky enough for the coat below to also have an air hole or wormhole for that to go through, then moisture can penetrate through, and before you know it, that can result in a rust patch. The more coats you put on, the less likelihood of any wormholes or any areas allowing paint to move through. So again, numbers of coats, much better. It goes, I'm talking about gloss at the moment, but it goes for all your coatings. We apply 4 primers to all metal surfaces. The reason for that is that layering system ensures we get the best coverage and hopefully the best resistance to the metal deterioration through rusting or anything else. So always think about the number of coats makes up for the best job. If you've watched any of our videos in the past, you'll know that we work a 10 coat system. So we work 4 primers, 3 undercoats and then 3 top coats. And that system gives us the knowledge and the confidence that we're leaving no areas thin or uncovered with paint. We know that that's going to hold for a good period of time, and we're quite happy to sleep well at night knowing that, you know, we've met the manufacturer's specifications, and that's an important thing. Whatever painting you're doing, meet the requirements. If it says 3 coats with an overall thickness of whatever microns it might be, try to make sure you do that, because it's a very simple system that the less paint thickness you have, the shorter period of time it will last. Now I'm going to make this the last brush application, and I'm going to swap over and knock it on with a roller, but still lay it off with a brush, so you can see again a different technique. There won't be any noticeable difference in the 2 surfaces, and that's why I want to continue this surface on with the next. Although I've been chatting away here while we're painting, the system I'm using hasn't changed. I'm still painting 9-inch squares, leaving a gap around each square, blending in as I go. Once I'm happy I've got that surface on. Try as much as you can to master, if you want to do it this way, master a good brush stroke. A brush stroke should stay in contact all times with the surface that you're on. It stops flicking. The thing is, if you flick in that direction, there's a good chance you're going to paint over the surface or flick paint over the surface you've already worked. So try and master a good brush stroke. This isn't the only bit of painting I'm going to do on this little video clip, so I'll be talking about some more of the finer items as we move on to actually painting a cabin side, which is the next bit. Okay, now as you can see, I've swapped one brush. I've still kept my laying off brush, but I've swapped for a roller. High density foam roller. I've tried using various sorts, flocked rollers and all sorts of things. I'm personally not to any great success. I'm happy to use this ordinary foam roller. Now, again, there are people that will say to you, oh, you can't use a roller, you don't get enough paint on, and whatever. You know, what you're aiming for is the right amount of paint. So with a roller, if you don't think there's enough paint on there, you just add some more to it. Very difficult to do that with a brush. When you're painting, if you don't get enough paint on when you're first applying it with a brush, you'll struggle. A roller does give you that ability to put the paint on quite easily. It's a good way if you're starting out in doing a bit of painting, but be aware, until the roller starts to absorb plenty of paint, you might have to go over that same square a couple of times just to make sure you've got the amount of paint on there that you want. And then again, just as before, look, we just blend it all together. The reason we use rollers, or I use a roller, is it's quick, it's easy. There's not, and these woosters are just made for a roller. It's quick, it's easy, and I can get a nice finish with a minimum amount of fuss. And once you get used to using it, a lot of people don't like using, you know, 2 brushes or you know, a brush and a roller, especially when we're using trays. I used to use a tray a lot and stand my tray on a chair and keep moving the chair around, and It is a bit of a faff doing it. Since somebody on YouTube posted and said, have you tried a Worcester, I would probably still be using a tray. So if that gentleman happens to watch this, thank you very much. Because the Worcester certainly makes life an awful lot easier. It comes with little insert trays, so when you finish you can just ditch the tray and it's ready for next time. None of that trying to balance your roller on the side of the tray while you're not using it or anything else. You just pop the roller in the tray on the side there, it's kept free of the paint, works a treat. So it's a nice system whether you're using two brushes or a brush and a roller. Either way, you should be able to achieve a nice finish, and painting isn't difficult. I've had lots of people on my courses over the years that we've been doing it, and they've all gone away happy that they can go away and put a bit of paint on. I had a gentleman and his son come on one of the courses, and they were going to go away and paint their boat, the family boat, and phoned me up and said, we've just painted the boat. This is quite a long time after they've been on the course, and it all went swimmingly well. And I said, oh, that's great, you know, I'm really pleased. And what they've done is they've got a board like I'm using here, or a couple of boards, screwed them to the garage wall, and they practiced. And like anything in life, if you practice, you'll get better at it, you'll get a better feel for what you're doing, you know. And a bit of MDF like this, you know, you can go out there, you can practice, and when you're happy that you're getting the results that you want, then that's the time to go out and do it on the side of your boat. Because having watched me do this, I think you'll appreciate that the two brushes, it's a little bit harder. You have to just think about painting those squares and blending them together, so there's a bit more going on. But the last little bit I've done here with the roller, I'm sure you can see that with a minimum amount of practice, you'll be able to get that sort of finish. Right, you saw me paint the one panel, very straightforward, but when you think about it, a narrowboat is just a series of panels. So once you can paint a flat panel like that, that's covered a huge amount of the boat that you need to work with. This is primarily a coach painting video. However, as you're painting, you're going to come across, certainly with a narrowboat, you're going to come across windows. There are going to be certain things that you need to negotiate while you're painting. So we thought what we'd do is I'll just paint along here, and we can have a look at that as we go along. Now just before I start, or I'll start, otherwise you'll be falling asleep before I get to the end of it. So whether it's been obvious or not, you will notice that I always start on the top right hand corner of a panel. Now there's a reason for this. As I'm working, I'll be working away from the painted surface. So I'm not going to be standing in front of it, and by standing to my left or standing to the left of the work, I can also see that when I've painted it, it's going on nicely, and I can see how my brush is pulling through the paint as I'm laying it off, or taking off, if that's probably the more correct term. So always start for right hand painters on the right hand side and work to your left. You'll find the finish that you achieve doing that. And try to avoid, I haven't moved over yet, but try to avoid standing in front of your work, because you'll find that laying off becomes cramped and more difficult to work with. Okay, so as you're laying off, just watch the brush. Okay, and you can be able to watch the tips of the bristles all the way to the edge. Now this is important. You can paint squares, you can blend them together, you can go through it. There's always the chance that there may be contamination on the surface, a fingerprint or something, and the paint, for whatever reason, it does not want to stick. Fingerprints are a pretty good example. By watching the brush go down and being to the left of my work, I can look down there and I can see that there are no dry patches, no missed bits, and I'm confident now that I can move on. And this is really quite important. This is the main sort of parts of coach painting, because the application, once you practice it a bit, is fairly straightforward. I've often thought, you know, if you went into a school with a load of youngsters and said, I want you to paint me 3 squares and then blend them together and pull a brush through them, they'd probably all be quite happy to do that. And if you were painting anything other than your beloved boat, you'd probably be quite happy to do it as well. And it's only the pressure that we put on ourselves that makes painting any more than that. Just remember that, you know, you are just painting squares. Don't look down your narrowboat and think, my God, I've got 70 foot of this to do, and start to panic. That's not going to help you at all. Just think, I'm just going to paint these squares, I'm just going to blend them together, and I'm just going to keep working my way down, because that's all it really comes down to. But there are tricks and there are little things that, as professionals painting every day, we know about and we're happy to share with you. So you'll often notice that I just run the brush horizontally before I start to lay off. It's a bit of a habit, but it just ensures that I've got that top edge where the tape line is every time. I've run in line with the tape, and that way I'm not going to get a little dry bit hanging off the underneath side of that tape. Always put plenty of pressure on the brush, and if your brush starts to fill up with paint and this one's starting to get a little bit of a build up, you can always wipe it on a kettle just to remove that surplus. An old paint tin, anything, just so you just pull the brush out and just rid yourself of that surplus paint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint as far as the window, and then once I've got halfway across the window, we'll swap over the roller, and then that allows you really to go away and decide which system you want to work with. When you want to brush and roller, just a brush. It's worth mentioning as well, because it's a term that you'll hear, and if you go on the internet and have a look, you get all sorts of demonstrations. Quite funny, when we were at the international factory, they referred to it as roller and tipping off with the brush, and there is quite a good video of that taking place on YouTube. That is not coach painting. That is not the application process that we're looking at with you here. That's purely rolling paint onto a surface and removing the bubbles with the tip of a brush that the roller leaves behind. It's not doing what we're doing, which is actually laying the paint off and leaving ourselves a nice surface to work with. You often see it done, and they're doing it at a very fast rate, and it literally is a guy following somebody with a roller, very quickly whipping the brush across the surface, and all they're doing is just knocking off the air bubbles. It's not doing what we're doing here, which is actually the laying off process. You can do the same, exactly that process, and this sometimes is where people say, oh yeah, but I got a rubbish finish, it's not a very good method, rollers are rubbish. The problem is, if you do it with a on your boat, or you use that method, the downside to it is that you'll still see the stipple. You'll still get that texture that the roller leaves still showing through in your paintwork. So you get a mottled appearance. And of course, this is when people say, using a roller, it's rubbish. You get, don't matter whether you tip it off with a brush, it still looks rubbish. Well, we're not doing that. So this is the point that we perhaps need to make, is we're not doing that. We're just using the roller in the place of that other brush, and that's all it's about. It's just a means of putting paint on a surface, and no more than that. Now, when you do come to a window, as I've come to, you could see that I used the edges of the window just like a piece of tape. I didn't go right up to them, I blended to them after I'd applied the paint. Okay, and here we're just going to lift up into the gap of the window. If you go that way, you'll wipe your brush on the edge, it'll act like a blade, and the paint will come off your brush and just sit on that surface. And the moment you leave or turn your back, the paint will run off that edge, and you'll be cursing that all your hard work has come to nothing because you've got runs in your paintwork. So that's the brush and roller, sorry, that's the double brush into a window. I'm just going to swap my one brush for a roller. Just show you the roller technique again. And again, look, roller straight through, gap either side, blend it to the edges. Yeah, it's always better to, even with a roller, to move the paint to where you want it. So you move across to the edge, okay? And again, you're not emulsioning. It's not just a case of changing colour. We're trying to put an amount of paint on the surface. Now, maybe in later videos, we'll actually start measuring these surfaces and go through it in a little bit more detail as to how much we're looking at. But there are methods, there are ways where we can use wet film combs and things like that to actually gauge the thickness of the paint as we're applying it. But if you're thinking about painting, or you're thinking about doing quite a lot of painting, it's worth doing a course. That's going to sound now like I'm trying to flog courses, but you can't beat hands-on and having somebody there just to say you want a bit more or a bit less paint on there and answer those questions that I can't answer right now. And that neatly sort of linked me into the fact that I'm actually painting at the Narrowboat Skills Centre at the moment. Around the room here there are another 4 of these workstations. These are all steel, by the way, so it's just exactly as it would be painting your own boat. And we do a 2-day course which is geared mostly at looking after your boat, maintaining your boat, dealing with rust spots, rust patches, scratches, dents, the normal knockabout damage that you get on a narrowboat. However, you do get to paint full panels like this, having made some minor repairs to damage that I inflict at the beginning of the course. And it's good. It's a good course. There's a guy in the marina that's just finished painting his boat, did one of the courses, made a lovely job of it. It just answers those questions and does give you enough to go away and start painting panels and doing that little bit extra. We also do a 5-day course that's really aimed at people that have either bought sailorways or are looking at maybe stripping the whole boat down and giving it a full repaint. We cover everything from the types of paints, the data sheets, everything you need to know to accomplish it. So they're useful courses. For the artistic amongst you, we also do songwriting courses, the Roses and Castles type canal art, and we don't stop there. If there's anything you can think about that you fancy having a course on that is to do with your narrowboat, we've probably got them covered. We do the RYA helmsman's course and the crewman's course, so if it's additional driving tuition or understanding the ins and outs of working locks and looking at it from a professional's point of view, that's always, we can all learn, that's for sure. So you've got those courses. We do the diesel engine maintenance course, so if you want to learn how to service your boat and general maintenance, including your batteries and looking after the stern gland and all that sort of thing, that's all covered in that course. For those people, and we meet quite a lot of people that don't necessarily have a boat. They've turned up at Crit Show and chatted to us on the stand and maybe looking at a sail away, or picking up a second-hand boat and maybe even thinking about, you know, the need for repainting. Well, we do a boat buyers course, and a fantastic little course designed for you to think about what it is you actually want when you buy a boat, whether it's 12 volt systems, 24, whether you're going to live on your boat, whether it's a holiday boat, what's the difference, you know, long-term cruise, whatever. And that course, run over a day, is a cracking little course. You're here at the marina, you go out, you go and have a look at other boats, making decisions on whether you want to cruise astern, and so on. So a whole host of courses, all delivered here at the Narrowboat Skills Centre. If you want to do a helmsman's course, we've got our own little boat. We call it little boats, proper narrowboat, but it's our little boat, and you can check the paintwork out because we painted it as well. But the Skills Centre, I can't say enough of good things about it. It's giving narrowboaters the opportunity to come and learn a huge variety of skills. We've even got a local chef who's looking at, you know, that time when it would be nice just to have your friends over to the boat and cook something nice, but you've got that limited space of a galley. So we're doing courses where you can come learn about some nice cuisine, how to put that little special meal together for your friends when they come and visit you. And then you can take them outside and show them what a lovely job you made of painting your boat, and how clean your engine room is, and how efficiently you look after your boat. So that's coach painting. Hopefully that's given you an indication of where you can go with it. There are lots of people that will argue that what I've done isn't coach painting, or, you know, you don't need to use two brushes, or a roller's not the right way to go, and so on. You know, we're all open to criticism. I've studied it. I've studied quite a lot and spoken to quite a lot of coach painters from a long time ago. And what you have to appreciate nowadays is we're dealing with paints that are aimed at the professional and the DIYer. Now, if you've got DIY written in that sentence, it means it's got to be user friendly. And these paints are user friendly in the fact that they dry quite quickly. They apply quite easily. But the quick drying means that the flowing out doesn't happen unless you start adjusting paints. So my advice to you is, you'll get a good film thickness, which is the key thing. Remember, paint's there to protect your boat. A pretty boat should just be a bonus of your painting. So you'll get a good finish. It's the finish that, what I've just done there is what we do to all our boats, and that's the finish we put on our boats. When we've finished, you know, our film thickness is in some cases twice as much as often applied, and that's where we guarantee that we're doing it to the manufacturer's specifications and we're getting that film thickness on. The most important thing is get the paint on. That's what protects your boat. And use a quality paint. I've just painted this with International. As you see, it went on very easily, very well. It's a quality product, and once this has dried off and gone hard, that's going to last you for years. So I hope it's helped. You know, we are here to help you. If you want to come and do a course, feel free. If not, contact me through emails, and we'll be always here to help. And I hope you watch this a few times, go away and have a practice, and come out with a nicely painted boat. Thanks for watching.